Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the meeting of the Northern Planning Committee. We are not expecting any fire drill today. In the event of the alarm sounding, please leave the building and gather at the front of the building. I'm obliged to inform you that this meeting is being live streamed and recorded. Could I ask you please to ensure that mobile phones are switched off? To ensure the members of this committee and all the points raised by the public speakers are properly heard, I must advise you that I will not tolerate any disruptive behaviour. This is a meeting held in the public, not a public meeting, and in such behaviour takes place and persists, I will adjourn the meeting. I shall now ask the members of the committee and officers to introduce themselves. So we'll start with you, Mark, please.
Hello, Mark Jones. I represent Caboyne, Slatt and Western, and I'm also the Vice Chairman. Thank you.
Joyce Arrow, representing St Oswald.
Chairman, I'm here as a substitute. I represent the church.
Councillor Jehan Ellesmere.
Edward Towers, representing When Rural at Wixtel.
Right, we're good today.
Two tents together, sign the fine weather, that's what I'm told. Ted Clark, Basin Hill, and also Colton and Sutton, primarily interested and responsible for Basin Hill, Bunker. David.
Councillor Vasma, representing Underdale in Shrewsbury.
It's done. Mike.
Mike Ishwood, representing Oswestry West.
Councillor Vincent, I'm Mike.
Thank you. I forgot to introduce myself. I'm Paul Wynne, representing Priestwood. Okay. Right, apologies for absence. We've had two apologies. Gary Bridgette, Joe Dakin substituting. Alex Wagner dropped out last night, no substitution. Item 2, to confirm the minutes of the meeting held on 28th of September 2021. These are circulated to members with the agenda. Can I have a proposal second, please? Thank you, Joyce. Thank you, Edward. There are no public questions. Just before we go any further, can the officers introduce themselves, please? So, Kelvin.
Kelvin Hall, Principal Planner. Philip Muller, new Principal Planner.
Miranda Garrard, Solicitor.
It's Edward West, the Local Times Manager.
Mark Wootton, Highways.
Derry Marshall, Committee Officer.
Yeah. Right, you're right. Public questions, there are none. Are there any peculiar interests? Anybody? Peculiar interest, anybody? No? Okay. Okay, we'll move on to the agenda. Item 5, Holscott Junior School, Featherbed Lane, Holscott, Shrewsbury. Presenting this, please.
Thank you, Chair. This is an application for a variation of the approved layout and design of the recently permitted extensions to Holscott Junior School in Shrewsbury. The application came to committee last month and members resolved to defer consideration of it to allow an investigation as to whether the sprinkler tank could be sunk into the ground. I'll run through the plans that were last shown at last month's meeting, and there are some additional photographs and an additional plan to show as well. This is the location plan. It shows the location of the school, the existing school buildings shown in brown, and the extensions that were permitted earlier this year in grey. This is the proposed layout of the school. It includes a minor change to the pedestrian entrance position at the top right and some minor changes to the proposed car park, which is shown at the top left. The application includes full details of the planned compound, which is shown at the bottom right of this slide. The compound would be moved further away from the nearest houses, which are just beyond the site boundary on the right-hand side of the slide. Next one, this shows the proposed elevations of the plant. It would include a water sprinkler tank with a ladder above, which is shown in white on the top two elevations. And there would also be an air source heat pumps, which are shown white in the bottom elevation. This shows the fencing proposed around the plant compound. There will be 2.5 metres high weld mesh fence around the sprinkler tank, a 3.2 metres high acoustic timber fence around the air source heat pumps, and the whole compound would have a hedgerow planted around its perimeter. This shows the fencing to be erected and upgraded around the school. The majority of this would be welded mesh metal fencing standard. And this is the fencing designs proposed. So this is a photograph taken from the end of Craig Close, which is on the southeastern side of the site, looking towards the plant compound, with the new classrooms extensions beyond. The cream-coloured building is a container building which would enclose the pumping chamber. And for reference, this is 2.5 metres high. This shows the plant compound in relation to the nearby houses, with the school extension buildings beyond. And this is a similar view, and it shows a better view of the earth bank, which would be seeded on conclusion of the construction works. This is a new drawing that's been submitted, and it shows the relative height of the nearby houses and the plant compound. So you can see on the top section, the nearest house is on the right-hand side of this, and then you can see the garden to the left of that, and then the school boundary, and then the plant compound at a slightly elevated position, and the proposed screening around the plant compound. The concrete slab of the compound is set just under 1.2 metres higher than the ground levels at the edge of the houses. The tank will be 2.5 metres high, so the top of the tank, excluding the ladder, would be 3.7 metres higher than the garden level of the nearby houses. The tank will be about 22 metres away from the nearest house. Just for reference, this is a photo of the original tank, which was put in place without planning permission. This has now been removed, and for reference, this was 5.2 metres high. So the proposed one is about half that height, and obviously wider. And the proposed one will be a similar height to the cream-coloured building shown on that photograph. That's the approved drainage plan. So, as explained in section 3 of the update report, the application has advised that it would not be possible to site the tank or to sink the tank into the ground, as it would not be possible to get insurance for it. Even if it were possible, it would make maintenance inspections dangerous and challenging and would not meet construction design and management regulations. The tank and compound will be screened by welded mesh fencing and a perimeter hedgerow. Whilst it's appreciated that the tank will be on raised ground, it is still considered at a height of 3.7 metres and a distance of 22 metres away from the nearest house would not result in unacceptable impacts on the amenity of the nearest residents. Therefore, the officer's recommendation remains that planning permission is granted, subject to the conditions listed in the update report. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Calvin. We have two speakers on this one. First of all, we have Councillor Kevin Cardy. All right, Kenny.
Thank you, Chair.
I'd like to see you.
Thank you, Chair.
3 minutes. No, 5 minutes.
I won't take long on this one. Just a quick question. We're being told all the time the height of the actual tank. Is that including the raised from the bottom of the raised area to the top of the tank? In other words, if you've raised it 1.1 metres, are you adding that on to the height of the tank? Is that what you're doing?
Go on doing that because obviously.
Yeah, I'd like an answer.
Thank you, Chair. The raised earth is 1.1 metres above original ground levels, and then on top of that is a 2.5 metre height of the tank.
So 3.6 metres.
3.7 metres.
Right, okay, sorry. Okay, thank you. Thank you, Chairman, and thank you, committee, for deferring your decision on this application. As it turns out, the answer to the question was so simple that it could probably have been supplied on the day of our last meeting. I, of course, accept that to insert a below-ground reservoir is not possible, but there are still alternatives. I therefore return to objections of distance and height. In section 4.3, the officer says, and I quote, "The compound would be 22 metres away from the nearest properties." That is from that window on our left to the window on our right. And it is considered that this constitutes an acceptable separation distance in view of the limited scale of development. I like to think about that quote. What are these considerations based upon, and why does the size of the development make any difference to the distancing of the reservoir? 20 metres, as I've said, is a short distance, approximately the width of this room. I'm asking, should anybody be expected to live that short distance from such an unsightly construction? One of the problems with the unapproved construction was its height. The height was overpowering and out of scale and led to the dismantling of the tower. Yet with the new proposal, the height is alleged to be marginally less, but we've never been given an overall height until today, sorry. The tower remains overpowering and out of scale. It's only moved 5.5 metres, about 17 feet, 18 feet. Human Rights Article 8 gives the right to respect for private and family life, and First Protocol Article 1 allows for the peaceful enjoyment of possessions. Why is it the committees rarely take these human rights into consideration? If there is one development or an element of a development that runs like a train through these human rights articles, it is this one. As residents have told me, the tower is the first thing they will see in the mornings, and it will be there every day of their residences. Also, it will reduce the values of those homes that are privately owned. There has been absolutely no consideration for the residents of the area or the effects on their day-to-day lives, as can be evidenced by the original construction being built such a short distance from a resident's boundary fence. I ask you to consider this application carefully, and in doing so, please consider the dictum. If I wouldn't have it outside my property, then I wouldn't expect anybody else to have it outside theirs. Thank you.
Thank you. Right, we have Steve Owen, the agent. Thank you, Steve. I'd like to come forward. I don't know, Emily, there we go. Over there, please. Steve, you've got 3 minutes and we'll give you a 30-second warning, okay?
Thank you very much. Does it work? Thank you very much for giving us a chance to speak. My name is Stephen Owen. I'm representing Payways, the contractor. I think the only points I probably need to pick up on from Councillor Pardy are probably to do with the location of the tank. So one of the things that got picked up early in the design is where the tank can be positioned. This position has been driven out primarily by Sport England. Obviously, they're trying to guard obviously the area of pitches. So there's a fundamental objection to any other loss of sports pitch, which they classified as pretty well all of the green space to the rear of the school. The hard standing play areas obviously have to be increased to give the hard standing sports pitches, and these were designed to the minimum standards required by the Education Authority. Sport England fundamentally object to any more green space being given over to other uses. We looked at obviously the daylight factors for the classrooms and the teaching spaces, hence that's where it's been positioned there. And then obviously the forest school, which is an established area of trees, which the class is an important teaching resource, site feature and biodiverse habitat, was left in its current position. So the sprinklers are cited there. It's cited 26.255 from the edge of the boundary of the property to the edge of the tank. The tank then is sitting further 3 metres inside that. The sprinkler, and obviously Calvin said before about the sprinkler tank hump height been shown on the drawing, and that obviously that is with the top level of the sprinkler tank, the proposed sprinkler tank when it sits on there. I don't need to cover any of the other points because I don't think any of them have been raised. So unless there's any questions, that's all I have. Thank you, Chair.
Don't have any questions, but that's it. Thank you. Thank you very much, Steve. Before going further, I'm just going to ask Miranda, we kind of a different way of voting. Would you like to just explain this, Miranda?
Thank you, Chair. Sorry to sort of perhaps interrupt the flow of the application. The Chair was going to ask me just to explain at the beginning before we went into them. At the request of the monitoring officer, following some previous issues as a different planning committee, it's been asked that we do a roll call vote, similar to how we did when we were doing virtual meetings. It's not a recorded vote, but we just simply count the votes by asking you individually rather than for a show of hands. So that's at the request of the monitoring officer. Thank you.
Thank you, Miranda. Okay, I shall open the floor now. Thank you, Vince.
I kind of figure I might go second or third this time, but there we go. We obviously had I'm not going to say a huge amount because I think we discussed this particular application at length at the last meeting. We were concerned that perhaps not enough had been done to hide the tank a bit more. And we charged officers with going away and making sure that it couldn't be sunk into the ground or whatever. They've done that. I'm sure they've done it diligently. We are where we are with this. And I'm going to move the officer's recommendations. It is what it is. It's a school. It's got green credentials. I think we can chase our tails on this round and round and have a 30, 40-minute debate again, but I don't think it'll make any difference. I move the officer's recommendation.
Thank you, Vince. Mark?
Yeah, I'd like to second that comments of Vince. Councillor Kevin Pardy says there's a lot of objections, but there's only 2 on the books. We've had another month since the last application and nobody else has objected. So I think we should now let this one go through.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Jeff.
I did wonder why this tank can't be bunded. I know you can't sink it into the ground, but you can lower it into the ground with a wall around it, so you can still carry out inspections. And for the life of me, I can't understand why that is not possible, because I've worked in many companies with tanks that are bunded, and part of the tank is submerged and part of it is above ground. And that, to me, that seems a sensible halfway solution.
Thank you, Jeff. There was an explanation. Calvin, there was an explanation you couldn't go any further down, wasn't it? Just like to.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yeah, I did raise this with the applicant about the possibility of it being bunded. The response was the sprinkler requires a drain connection which has to be foul. One of the main reasons we need to do this is due to the fact that the water in the tank can become stagnant over time, meaning that it can contain Legionnaires' disease in some cases. The wastewater runs off from sprinkler tanks. So the wastewater runoffs from sprinkler tanks contain pipework, rust and grease from fittings and not acceptable to go into storm drains. The foul drain outfall off-site is on Featherbed Lane and is not deep, and therefore the sprinkler slab level is set to a suitable gravity outfall. If the sprinkler slab had been dropped into the ground by 1 metre, then all rainwater would fall. All rainwater fall would have to be pumped away and not gravity fed. If the tank was set down to this level, then it would be subject to rainwater build-up in time, which would affect the integrity of the tank. If the base was dropped into the ground, this would mean that the tank enclosure would be a stepped access, which is undesirable from a CDM perspective.
Thank you, Kelly. Okay, Jeff.
Yeah, can I say thank you for that? At least you've done a thorough job investigating that request, so thank you very much.
Thank you. I have a proposed and seconder. Anybody else wants to speak? Otherwise, we'll go to a roll call vote. Okay, well, we'll go to the vote.
Thank you, Chair. I'll call your name if you could just tell me for, against or abstention, please. Councillor Barrow.
For.
Councillor Dakin.
For.
Councillor Elmer.
For.
Councillor Clark.
Reluctantly for.
Councillor Hunt.
For.
Councillor Jones.
For.
Councillor Isherwood.
For.
Councillor Towers.
For.
Councillor Vasmer.
For.
Councillor Wynne.
For.
Thank you very much, that's unanimous. So we shall move on to the next one on the agenda.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Committee.
Oh, cheers, Kev. Thank you. Right, we have item 6, Land and West Road Web. Philip, you're presenting this.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Right, members will recall this application when it was presented to committee at last month's meeting and was deferred for a site visit and further consideration. An update report is attached to the original committee report as presented to the September Planning Committee. The application is made in outline with all matters other than highway access reserved for future consideration. For residential development and associated access, public open space, drainage and infrastructure. Earthworks for 100 dwellings on land west of Low Hill Road, Webb. There are 2 further letters of objections received on the as set out in the update sheet. One in relation to issues raised by the local member, to which members were copied in to direct by email from the local member. And please note the response received from the council's drainage manager in consideration of issues raised in relation to drainage matters. To which drainage manager quite clearly considers the proposal on drainage matters is acceptable at outline stage. Shropshire Council Highways Manager also considers the response on highway matters to the application and considers highway matters as discussed in the report are acceptable. The members will be aware of the site, having visited it earlier today. But before we go on to that, the planning policy manager is sitting to the side of me, and I would like him to respond, please, in relation to the 5-year land supply and housing delivery before we go on to the presentation slides, please.
Thank you, Philip. Thank you. Thank you, Chair. Can you all hear me? Thank you. I think I'm here principally to talk about the 5-year housing and supply issue, and it was just a point which I know has been potentially raised as part of the application, and it was just to put, just to give information really about where this site is within the 5-year housing and supply, and just to give you the information that the current housing and supply, which we have included and is updated on our website at the moment, and indicates we have about a 6-year supply of deliverable housing sites. This site is included within the 5 years of that, it being an allocated site in the adopted local plan, and we feel as though it is capable of delivery within the next number of years. Now, I think a point here is that obviously this is subject to consideration at a planning application. I'm aware of the history of the planning application on the site, and obviously it has been refused once. Depending on the outcome of the committee decision today, we may need to review that position of whether it continues to be included within the 5-year supply or not, because we need to make sure that the sites we include within the 5-year supply have a realistic prospect of delivery. Okay, that is the test we have to abide by. So we feel as though we have a very precautionary approach when looking at housing and supply, because we want examination regularly as part of this process. there's lots of developers, agents out there who will seek to challenge us on these proposals. We consider we have a housing land supply at the moment, but equally it will include sites like this, which, as I say, are allocated in the local plan, the adopted local plan. If there's a resolution today that we don't want to approve this site, we would have to think again about whether it's applicable for this site to be included in the 5-year supply on the basis of it being a realistic prospect of delivery. So that's just where we're at with the 5-year supply position. I'm happy to answer any other questions you may have as well on policy issues as well.
Thank you, Randy.
Thank you, Eddie. Right, we'll now go on to the site and the presentation of the slides. Application site is outlined in red. The northern piece sticking out is the part of the site that is outside the recognised development limit for web in accordance with the housing allocation. That represents approximately 25% of the site. Next one. This is a master plan indicating how development could look in the event of works being carried out. This plan clearly for indicative purposes only. And final, next plan. A master plan indicating landscaping on site. Landscaping, though, is reserved for future consideration, and therefore this plan also for indicative purposes only. We now have some photographs of the site indicating the site and its surroundings. It's on the junction with Pims Road, and the development members will have noted this morning, running up to this junction, main single story, and below it on Lowell Road, the site of the school. The bottom two photographs representing the site itself and its open, rural, countryside aspect. This is the road running past the site. The first photograph shows the junction to the school where we stood this morning. The bottom one, next one is the road running past the site. And the third one, the larger one, the application site itself. Okay, that is similar photographs. Application site is mainly allocated for residential development in accordance with the local plan. However, as I've indicated, approximately 25% of the site is outside the development boundary, and hence application was advertised as a departure to the local plan. It must be recognised that a gas mains pipe crosses through part of the allocated site, and that this needs an exclusion zone around it in relation to residential development. You'll notice in the update report the applicants have indicated further explanation on this, and I have copied out their response in full for you as part of the updated report. Also, a material consideration is the web Samda policy in relation to the site, which allows for additional land for community recreational use. This is policy S171A, and for the allocation of the site for development. The council's Parks Countryside Manager raises no objections to the application. The layout and landscaping, of course, as I've indicated, reserved for future consideration. So the council's landscape consultant considers the development will have an adverse impact on the surrounding landscape. He acknowledges the site is mostly allocated for residential development in accordance with the local plan. Thus, any development on site will need significant landscape mitigation at the lower end of density levels. It is considered up to 100 dwellings is acceptable for the site as a whole. It is necessary, if it's necessary to condition as such, that's something for members to take in way up in the planning balance. Members will also be aware of the applicant's further explanation, as I've touched on, with the gas pipe and the exclusion zone. So, ecology issues, where members will be aware that this application has been subject to previous application that was subject to refusal of delegated powers. The reasons for refusal centred around lack of information, basically, and on ecology and landscape. You'll note in the update sheet the further response about from the landscape officer, which clearly sets out and explains the difference between the previous application and why it was refused on landscape grounds, and why he thinks, although it's with its adverse impact on the landscape, it is now acceptable. Ecology issues are resolved. They were resolved as part of the appeal process, and therefore the council will not be defending ecological issues in the event of the appeal, which is actually scheduled for a week today. It is considered that any reserve matters application will adequately address residential amenity and privacy issues and potential noise issues. So therefore, finally, the major issues in the planning balance in relation to this application are: site is mostly allocated in local plan for housing development, for WEM, representing its main housing allocation development site during the current SAMDEM local plan period as set out in the SAMDEM. This is a significant planning consideration in favour of the application. As I've indicated, policy 17.1a is clear in that additional land is acceptable for community use adjoining the site. That is the northern tip, which sticks out into the countryside as set out on the plan overhead. The Structure Council landscape consultant was acknowledging that most of the site is allocated for housing. He considers the development site will have an adverse impact, and therefore significant landscape mitigation required. If the additional land was to be used for housing, then this would assist in a lower density rate and improve integration into the surrounding countryside. You'll notice the suggested conditions as set out in Appendix 1 include a condition restricting development on site to 100 dwellings. Members may feel in the event that if they were to support the application, that this could do with further strengthening. That's another thing to weigh up in the balance. Unlike many other settlements, WEM has not seen significant development during the plan period, and this site is its major housing development allocated site. There's also the housing supply issue by my colleague, as you just heard, planning policy. Drainage and highway matters are considered acceptable, with no objections raised from either of the council's specific experts in these fields. And as I touched on before, I do advise you take note of what the drainage manager has said in his response I received yesterday, which is included on the update sheet. In relation to the previous refusal for the site, as I've already touched on, the council's landscape consultant has confirmed that issues in relation to landscape and visual impacts have been satisfactorily addressed, subject to the current application as set out in the update report to committee. There's also the applicants, as I've set out in the update sheet, their further justification, which is also a material consideration to consider, the fact that a gas mains pipe does pass through the site. If you have considered, if in the event of approval you have considered significant concerns about this, then you need to make very clear that there's been no planning weight given to the indicative plans in relation to this matter, in consideration of any future reserve matters which will come before the council for consideration. Therefore, in conclusion, the recommendation remains one of approval, subject to conditions as outlined in Appendix 1, attached to the report, and any modifications to these conditions as considered necessary by the Assistant Director, and the inclusion of an additional condition with regards to housing numbers was recommended with the previous recommendation. That is now included in the list of conditions before you today. That is the only change to the conditions as is presently stand in Appendix 1 from the previous report to committee. There's also necessity for signing of Section 106 agreement in order to ensure provision of affordable housing on-site, open space provision and maintenance, and a financial contribution towards the visitor management mitigation at Colmere Ramsey site. Now, you may wonder why, as a development at Wem, going to pay a contribution to a site out in the Ellesmere direction. That is something ecology are asking now on developments within a certain radius of this Ramsey site, as evidence indicates that local people are causing pollution with dog walking, etc. I bring that matter to your attention as the local member did query as to why it formed part of this application. That concludes my presentation on this application, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Philip. Everyone else come in?
Thank you, Chair. It was just a point of for a point of clarity to make everyone absolutely sure which bit of the site is included within the adopted local plan and which isn't. It was just a real point of clarity on that one. So if I may, I'll just point.
Please. It is a bit confusing, to be honest.
So actually, this section here is not included in the existing local plan for where in the local plan. This area here is included within the local plan for where is allocated for those in the adopted local plan. Just for the absolute clarity on that.
Thank you, Edward, because it did look, the Philip said the northern side, well, that's not the most northern thing, so thank you for saying that. Okay, we have 3 speakers, so we have Councillor Jeff Sow. You'd like to come forward, please, Jeff? You have 3 minutes with a 30-second warning, and we'll start as soon as you start speaking. That's on.
Is that on there?
Thank you, Ron. Yeah.
Thank you, Chair. I want to focus on just one issue, but first just to mention that the Colmere contribution isn't actually helpful to Wem. Wem Town Council and our climate group will offer much better prospects for Wem. The main issue is that this application is being presented as outline only for a designated site and suggesting things can be decided as reserved matters. I'm sorry, with respect, that's simply misleading and wrong. Although the site includes designated WEM 003, 25% of the proposed development lies beyond that site, beyond the development boundary, which has been established through a proper sample of compensation and in a way that would be an ugly protrusion into the middle of prime agricultural land. Are we really suggesting extending a designated site into open countryside can be a reserved matter? No, it must be subject to CS3, CS5, MD6 and MD7A. None of CS5 in particular are satisfied in this case. That gives you clear justification to refuse this application. The overarching condition of CS3 of the core strategy states development will take place within the town's development boundary on sites allocated for development. The additional land added to WEM 003 for this is neither within the development boundary nor a site allocated for development, so should be refused as being contrary to the core strategy. The applicant has cited S171A, which says, because the gas main, the design of the area may include additional land for community facilities. That argument is also, with respect, flawed. The application contradicts itself, saying extra land is needed to replace land that can't be developed, which implies it's for building on, then saying it could be for community use. In any case, CS5 says any building outside the boundary can only be used for required community uses that cannot be accommodated within settlements. The required community space can be accommodated within WEM 003. The easement area is sufficient. There is no argument. The earlier application accommodated 100 dwellings plus the community open space within the allocated WEM 003. It can be done. It's neither logical nor believable that the developers want extra space just for required community use. One final point. The report suggests that if this application is refused, WEM 003 will be completely lost for development and 5-year land supply will be affected. I can see no logic in that. Another application for this site within the boundary is currently being determined by appeal. The site certainly can be developed by redesigning the layout, reducing slightly the number of houses, despite assertions to the contrary, 100 is a maximum. Or even seeking to use additional land within the boundary, but the planning boundary must be sacrosanct and kept. We didn't put it there for nothing. I do not disagree with development on this site and believe other issues can be resolved, but we can't break this fundamental principle. Planning boundaries are established through a complex, thorough, consultative procedure and cannot be casually altered, let alone as reserved matters. Allowing this application would set an incredibly dangerous precedent, driving a coach and horses through a fundamental planning principle, and I respectfully urge you to reject. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeff. Nearly perfect timing. Right, move on to the next one, which is Councillor Towers. On the committee, you have 5 minutes, Edward. We're 30-second warning. We'll just switch on your arm. I think it's Jeff. Yes. Okay.
Well, thank you for coming to the site visit today, folks. That was really important. It was asked for in the last committee, and I appreciate that. I think you see things in a bit more realistic fashion, and I know Philip was agreeing with that today. This application, we are not in rejecting it. It's not NIMBYist, as I said in my email to you all. We do need development in Wem, but not at any price, at any cost. Our serious concerns continue, and Councillor Jeff Soul has outlined those with the Sandev boundary. Drainage and sewage, I accept, has gone to the reserve matters, and there's discussions to be had, but not today. And thank you for finding those out, Philip. Section 106, Jeff has already alluded to why Colmere. This has not been justified, this has been landed on us in this application. There is a very effective Wem Area Climate Forum fund about a year and a half ago that actually we discussed with. We've got plans, the town council has plans. We would love to be involved in that, and we'd like that to be reconsidered because we understand that section 106 is part of this outline planning permission. That's why we're getting to this point. The access you've heard about a lot of. Highways maintain where they are, but that's because I believe they didn't do a visit there the first time, and therefore are in a no-win situation now. But a new matter has come up, which is the one-way system in Wem that we are now seriously considering. When this discussion, this vote is at a crossroads of Wem, to be honest. We need to start moving forward, but this actually puts blocks in the way of that. We've got problems with the high street, problems with the infrastructure, but this really gets in the way of all that development, and it's not a good one. So it needs to have highways think again on this one-way thing and move the access further north, as we were discussing. I discussed with Mr. Tootle and Metaker, especially in view of the fact that the inspector now has the 2036 Sandev plans before them, where a further 200 homes are going to be allocated. So Wem's not against housing; it needs it, but not at any price. And of course, you've heard about the outside the Sandev boundary from Councillor Soul. Now, the previous applicant did not withdraw their application, but proceeded to appeal. That was interesting, and they're going to have this next week. Why is that? When in fact, we have asked for revisions of that original application, and they've tried to improve them, but they're still pressing ahead with the old. It doesn't make sense. And we as a council fear very much that Shropshire Council officers and to make a phenomenal pressure on us in this committee today, and we want to resist that because we don't fear this application being rejected today, because we want the development, but the better application that's coming forward. The 5-year land supply, we referred to that from the town clerk letters to you all. It doesn't make sense. The 5-year land supply we would certainly satisfy because another application would meet that, and there's no need to fear that at this point. So I repeat, we just need the right development in this allocated site, one that does not break boundary principles, one that sorts out the access so it's not up to the school and make it complicated. I mean, that access and safety features for the school will be developed and improved anyway without this application. And finally, the section 106 issues regarding Colmere resolved to the satisfaction of all concerned through consultation. So I ask the members of the committee to think again on this one and reject it again and allow us to get a better application for the town. Thank you.
Thank you, Edward. Okay, we have the agent now. Andrew Aplin, would you like to come forward, please? You have 3 minutes to start and 30 seconds more. Okay.
Thank you, Chair. As confirmed in the latest planning committee report and by officers, Joe?
A bit close to the microphone.
The majority of the application site falls within the adopted WEM development boundary and housing allocation WEM 003. The report also confirms that the delivery of 100 units proposed is crucial to WEM's housing supply in the current plan period and the emerging plan period. The housing supply identified as needed to support the town's important role and function as a key centre within the north east of the county. As raised at the previous committee and as discussed, during the master planning of the site, it became apparent that due to the location of a major gas pipeline cutting directly across the site with an easement of 30 metres and 15 metres on each side, it would not be possible to deliver all 100 units within the allocated area at an appropriate density and character for a raw ledge settlement location, while also retaining mature trees on site, providing sufficient areas for formal and informal open space, habitat creation, and the provision of a suitable drainage strategy. The provision of a comprehensive landscaping scheme will also be key to the successful delivery of this site. Therefore, land adjacent to the west of the allocation has been incorporated to allow for the character of the development at a lower and more appropriate density in respect to the site's setting. The inclusion of this modest amount of land outside the development boundary should be considered in light of the significant benefits of the scheme, which include the delivery of market housing in accordance with the needs of WEM, provision of compliant level of affordable housing to meet WEM's and Shropshire's acute affordable housing need and undersupply, the provision of family housing in light of the ongoing national housing crisis, a SIL payment of in the region of £580,000, majority of which we spent locally and with the input of the town council. Section 106 contributions in terms of open space management and the affordable housing, and as discussed, the Colmere Ramsar sites, which the contribution has been required at the request of Shropshire Ecology Officers and in relation to the habitat regulations assessment that underpins the local plan. And then finally, highways improvement works to Low Hill Road, which, as we've discussed, include a raised table and a school zone, and then also a mini roundabout at the junction of Low Hill Road and the B5063 to improve access to that point. It's recognised that there are local concerns about the scheme, in particular drainage and access, as we've discussed, and the access was a key consideration at the application stage, pre-application stage as well, when several options were discussed and the solution we have was agreed upon. In terms of drainage, the strategy accompanying the application provides a solution which will provide increased stormwater storage capacity and therefore a betterment to the system within the Pims Road and Low Hill Road area. Details of that will form part of the future reserve matter submission.
Thank you, Andrea. Time up.
Jay?
Time up, I'm afraid. 3 minutes. Okay, thank you very much. Philippe, would you like to address?
Yes, Mr. Chair, thank you. It's very clear to me now the key issue with this site is member or public concern with regards to land that's outside of the actual recognised development boundary of the site in accordance with the Sandown plan, albeit the policy S17 does allow for additional land for recreation. I've got to make members very aware that this is outline only, other than the access. And also, I'd like to point out the northern limb, which is the piece sticking out into the countryside, as pointed out by the planning policy manager. Please note the gas pipe, how that takes a significant chunk of the site height, and the only development left in it is equal to, in essence, to the land that is gas pipe going through, and the openness of the site, and the fact that the landscape consultant has emphasised any development on site will have an adverse impact, but in my opinion, any development on any site has an impact. However, this is open countryside, albeit recognised for development, and by having this extra land, it would lower the density. You'll see on the suggested conditions in Appendix 1, this condition restricting to 100 dwellings. You may consider that a further condition may be necessary. However, the crucial thing is to remind you is these plans are indicative only, and therefore carry no weight at this stage. You could reinforce this by adding the condition, if you're minded to approve, that any reserved matters does not give indication to the plans before you, albeit that they're indicative. It is the reserved matters that will decide the layout of the site as a whole. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Before I open the floor, I'd just like to make an observation, a comment to our local debate. Going on to highways, I think it's a very good site visit this morning. It showed where the entrance was. I know the school, know the area vaguely, but I think the narrowness of the road and the exit from the school is atrocious. It's tight, it's small, not much movement there for buses to come out. So with the entrance where it is, it does set it back further, which gives more room for the buses to get the swing, which I thought was quite interesting. That's just my comment at the moment. Now I'll open the floor. Thank you. Thank you, David.
Thanks, Chair. I'd just like to ask Solicitor about paragraph 1.17, and it says there that policy S171A allows additional land for use in relation to community facilities. Now, quite clearly, the land which is going to be outside the development boundary is going to be used for housing. It's not going to be used for community facilities. So that seems to me that policy would suggest that this cannot be allowed. Secondly, given that we have endless debates and consultations about boundaries and about developments, why is it that suddenly we can actually extend the boundary for a development? And doesn't this set a precedent? Because what any developer who comes along and gets a small problem with the area they want to develop, a small problem, they'll say, oh, we'll extend it. And this in my view, gives a free for all developers to kind of unilaterally extend the land which has been allocated for development so carefully by the council. So I think this application should be rejected on those bases. But I'll be interested to hear what the solicitor has to say.
Thank you, David.
Well, I think it's perhaps best if we first of all go back to first principles here, because of course what the law tells you members is that where you should make the decisions in accordance with the development plan unless material considerations indicate otherwise. So I don't think it's possible to suggest that one should reject things beyond the boundary simply out of hand. You have to look at the material considerations before you. So while development boundaries are very important because they're the development plan, it is not to say that they are completely set in stone forever if there are material considerations that indicate that something beyond them should be allowed. So that's the crucial thing to remember, that you're looking at what other material considerations have been put before you. The issue around policy 17A, it says the design of the site may include additional land for community facilities. So additional land has been included within this area, and it's not just that's the actual policy wording, but as I've also indicated to you, material considerations may indicate that you would go beyond that in certain circumstances, and it's highly unusual that you have got this particular constraint within the actual allocated area. So the overall design of the site isn't before you for today. You're simply being asked to look at the outline area. So you can't really tell what would be on that particular extra area as a whole. And you've got the wording of the policy plus the wider material considerations that have been outlined for you.
Okay.
Can I just come back on this? Thanks, Chair. Does this create a precedent, though? If we allow this application, does that create a precedent for future developers to use when coming to this committee? And secondly, material considerations, but surely there have to be very substantial material considerations, and I don't think these material considerations are substantial enough to warrant being used in this case.
I would suggest that it doesn't set a precedent because each case has to be decided on its own merits, and this has got some very particular circumstances around it. And it is not a precedent, it is simply a matter of planning law that you can beyond development plans when there are material considerations to do so. So it's not a precedent, it is a simple fact of how planning can work. And you're looking at the individual material considerations of this particular site. The weight to be given for the material considerations is obviously a matter for the decision taker. So it's a matter for you as decision takers to weigh as to the weight you give to them.
Thank you. Vince?
Thank you, Chair. Certainly my understanding was because each one's individual, you can't set a precedent. It is what it is. Obviously, colleagues who were here last time will be aware that I was not very happy with this, not very happy about the inclusion of the land outside the development boundary. That's because I believe that to be untouchable, sacrosanct, call it what you like. I wasn't at the point then aware of S17-1A, and I don't think that necessarily came across very, if at all, well at the last meeting. We are kind of, in a way, stuck a little bit between the devil and the deep blue sea, because the design and control would come at reserved matters. So what we're being asked to do, which I now understand is different to last, for me is different to last time, well not different to last time, but my view of it's different, is we're being asked to look at a site, 75% of which is within the development boundary. And if I understood a comment that I thought I picked up on this morning, the other 25% is in the submission that's gone forward to the inspectors. If Philip could answer that, that's correct. I don't know. Certainly somebody said there would be another 200 homes further up the road. But if it's in the submission, then we can give it some weight anyway. I wouldn't be happy to see houses on it, but I would be happy to see it being used for community use. It is a difficult one. We can't bring that community use forward until reserved matters, so I would want it to come certainly to back to committee. I also think, as was touched on by Philip, that there would need to be a condition put in that the submitted representation should in no way play any form in any reserved matters deliberations, because when we see it, there may be something better, but we shouldn't be giving any weight to that at all. That's just there for visual purposes to help us. I was worried about the drainage, but the local members seems to be satisfied on that. I was also a bit concerned about the highways, and I understand the town council talking about a one-way system, but this application's in the here and now, and it's not 6, 12, 18 months, 6 weeks, whatever down the line. So we have to deal with what we've got in front of us. I will listen to a bit more of the debate, but this now satisfies me as it stands, and I will be supporting the officers on this one. Just one question for Philip as well. I understand that the appeal is next week. I understand that within that appeal, there is a section, the appeal submitted doesn't include any community use for affordable housing on the area of land, which the policy would support. Is that correct? Can you just say yes or no?
No, the section 106, there is a section 106 being drawn up for the site, for the appeal, and in relation to today's with the current, that doesn't mean to say that we obviously think it's going to get approved, because I'm aware a draft decision notice got issued to the website. That was a clerical error. We have to prepare a draft decision in order to prepare a section 106. That section 106 is indicating 10% affordable housing, which is the minimum requirement for web.
Okay. This is going, I haven't finished, I just wanted a yes or no to that. That's kind of a Philip yes or no. There you go. Thank you, Philip. It's going to appeal next week. I think there is a probability, if it were to be successful in appeal, and I think given S17-1A, it probably would be successful in appeal. We would lose then all control over reserve matters, so on and so forth. And I think, to be honest, we owe it to the people of Wem to make sure we still have some input in this. So, unless somebody else has a convincing argument, otherwise I will be supporting this.
Thank you, Mr. Edwards. Just a clarification of the question.
Yeah, it's just a point there, Vince, about the additional land and its inclusion or otherwise in the emerging local plan. I just wanted to clarify, I'll get up again and point again 'cause it's easier, but the land, the additional land that you're talking about today, outside of the development boundary is not included in the emerging local plan. The land to the north of the site is included in the emerging local plan. So I wouldn't want anyone here to give weight to that in the decision making today, basically.
I just picked up the conversation and assumed it was, that's why I checked my facts.
Absolutely. So, land here is included in the draft emerging local plan examination at the moment. This land here is not. So just the absolute period.
Thank you, Chair. Just briefly in response to Councillor Hunt's comment about the control, to be clear, should the appeal be successful next week, conditions, any limitations on such a consent would be for the inspector, and that is what the council would not have control over. A reserve matters following that would come to the council, so there'd be control over that, but we would not have any control over the condition issued should that appeal be successful.
Thank you.
Yeah, I was going to point that out, but I also like to point out, we'd have no, if the appeal is successful, you'd have no control over this additional land that is outside. If you were minded to support the application today, you could suggest a condition would be attached, indicating no consideration to the indicative plans submitted, because you could be in a position at a later date with reserve matters application where they submit an application and they make it very clear that you were fully aware at this stage that that extra land was going to include additional housing. The fact of the matter is it will be the layout and design in relationship to the outline, to the reserve matters, sorry, that will finally decide what the layout of this site is going to look like.
Thank you. Joyce.
Thank you. As members will be aware, I was very concerned about highway conditions, particularly the junction of Low Hill Road with the Ellesmere Road, a particular tight corner. I do feel that is addressed by the mini roundabouts. I'm not so concerned about that. The drainage issue has been answered by Councillor Towers, and I actually spoke to the lady whose garden got flooded by the field. And she actually said she sort of welcomes it because it means her garden won't get flooded anymore. I'm always concerned when we get applications which are outlined, because as we know, anybody can come back with anything, so that is a concern for me. But I'm horrified to think that money from when the 106 money is going to go to Coalmeal. As has already been heard, they have a desire for that money and they can spend it, and they have something in place already where they can spend it in. When I'd like to ask who makes that decision, who decides where that money goes, and is there any way of pulling that back for the people of Wem? And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay.
Thank you, Chair. With regard to Section 106 agreements, we need to look at them very differently to the money that we get from SIL, which comes in and effectively that can be spent to support development in the local area. 106 money is very specific and has to meet certain legal tests for it to be required. So it has to be necessary to make the development acceptable. therefore addressing some particular impact of the development. In this instance, it has been specifically identified by the ecologists that funding is needed to address issues at the Ramsar site, which is a very specifically protected environmental site that it has been shown can be impacted from developments within the zone of influence of that Ramsar site. So it isn't the case that we can say that actually we'd rather that money was spent in Wen, because there isn't a defined impact that we're saying is necessary to make the development acceptable in a way that it would otherwise be unacceptable. So I think, and that is also supported by the relevant policy measure for the Wen Place Plan area, because as mitigation measures are required to remove the additional recreational pressure arising from development in WEM on the integrity of those Ramsar sites. So it's also required in policy for developments within this area. So I think that's the reason why you can't have it back to spend somewhere in WEM that you might prefer. So that's the legal requirements. Sorry.
Joyce, let's come back to that.
It seems very much to me like we're robbing Peter to pay Paul, and it's an ecologist's opinion that the money should be spent there because they have this identified site. That does concern me. I think it's wrong to take money from an area that is accepting housing when they have money. I can see where that's going there. Go on.
To be clear, it's not taking money from an area because you wouldn't be getting it at all, because it's not another identified impact of that development that you can justify the 106 requirement for. And the planning policy manager can also mention the relevant policy requirement for that contribution.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. It was just a point really, just saying that this is an issue that should be brought through the local plan preparation. There's a lot of background information around the technical information we have to do to get local plans through the process. It happens in the existing adopted local plan. It's happening now with the emerging local plan as well. It's all to do with the habitat regulation assessment. It's a technical piece of information which sits behind that. It is an ecology-led proposal, but it really does focus on the impact of development on specific areas, and it effectively draws a boundary around these areas and says all development that happens there needs to make a contribution to that, otherwise it won't be acceptable in habitat regulation terms. So really it's we don't have a choice. It is part of development, it is a natural part of development contributions. It is necessary to make this development acceptable.
Thank you. Mark?
The site visit really did open everyone's eyes. Firstly, this plan that we've got here clearly shows a good bit of planning. I think the extra land with the gas line in the way has made it a lovely little estate that the good people of Wales would be quite pleased to live in. Which is what we want to try and do as planners, isn't it, Philip? If you look across the road, the density of the houses across the road, you'll see they're a bit more squashed in, and the density on the other side is a lot better and a lot more green spaces. So I think in the future it will be a good place to live, which is what we're all trying to achieve. I think we haven't had much planning in WEM, so let's make it good planning if we're having planning. Now, secondly, if you walk across the road from the site, you can walk down that road, you can walk into town, you can probably walk to the train station if you fit, you can probably bike there as well. You can walk across the road to school, so that'll keep the school numbers up, which we need. Being school government numbers are a key issue to making a successful school, and that might reduce the number of people coming from different areas to the school as well, so that might reduce the buses and the traffic up that road. I think the traffic, Mark Woodman did explain very well on site with the raised area across the road. We'll start making the traffic slow down coming into the village, and hopefully it'll help with the buses coming out from the school turning out, which is quite difficult at the moment. So I think that's another good point. So I think all around I quite like it, and being a farming type, they've just taken the existing field. They haven't taken another field. They're just using the field that's already there. So I think I'm quite happy with it.
Thanks.
Well, only to say, Chair, that I'm not even going to mention Phillips rather than wording condition. If we get to it, then I'll just call it Phillips condition. Just to reiterate that as a condition, I wouldn't want this indicative plan that Councillor likes so much to be actually one that we use, because that's just pictorial. It will come back under reserved matters. So the roads that might be likeable might not be there, but it does need to come back under reserved matters. I'm actually going to move the officer's recommendation, subject to the Phillips condition, which you get from him to reiterate, because I can't remember 3,000 words, and also that this indicative plan bears no part or usable when it comes back on reserve matters. David, would you like to come back on that?
I think Councillor Hunt's very good. He was once said something up in the last sentence, actually, where I was trying to get it. I recommend retaining the condition maximum 100 houses, and that no weight is given to the indicative plans before you. And then, therefore, we will come to a reserve matters application, which clearly you like back committee, which would give you a clean sheet with regards to decision on the layout design as per that reserve matters application.
Thank you very much. Happy to accept that 500 word version, but I would say that I think the 100 homes is already in there, is added after last hearing.
But you're asking for it to come back with reserve matters.
Oh yes.
Right, just clarify that. David.
Thanks, Chair. I'd just like to say that I don't think anybody's against development of the land which has been allocated for development. I think most people, everybody seems to think that's a good idea and would agree site. As just been explained, the question is whether we should approve the extension of this development site, which is not in the local plan. And the solicitor has outlined and said that it's material consideration, and it's up to us as decision makers to actually give weight to that. And I think it's very important that we actually respect the boundaries that we have in our local plan. I don't think we should kind of, be changing them at the whim of a developer. And I think this application could, in my view, result in other developers actually coming forward and putting forward proposals for extensions of the sites that they are interested in. So I'd recommend councillors to vote against this. I think that the other issue, which I'm very concerned about as a result of the highway, I was wrote on the site visit today, is that there will be a congestion at that point near where the entrance to the school, the bottom of Pin Road, and the entrance to this site. There is inevitably going to be a problem there, whatever measures you put in place. And I don't think that the access point is at the right place. And I think that is a matter which is for consideration for us today. And on that basis, I'll also reject it.
Thank you, David. I think you've explained enough about every application is different, and you have to take one at a time. We all have different reasons, etc. That's been explained. So, Joyce.
Very quickly, I agree with everything Councillor Basson said, but I would like to pick up on something which I'm sure Councillor Howard is down to pick up on. When there's not a village, then when there's a town.
I was going to say that Mark might be offended, but it's been pointed out. Thank you, Mark.
Yeah, as I said, I quite like the site, and I know it's indicative, but it's a lot of green space there. And if we do cut the 25% off, they're going to squash them in there, aren't they? So that's what I feel. So I'll support Vince on this, that we have the condition that no more houses are built upon that, apart from the 100 that will be built. Also.
Second. No? Okay, I've got a second there. Thank you.
Can I just say I agree with 75% development of the site, but we must bear in mind that 25% is unallocated and 25% is not a small amount, it's quite a large amount. I do agree with the comments from certain councillors that there will be congestion outside the school for 2 hours in the morning and the evening, also rush hour time, with people, 100 houses, that's 200 odd cars coming out trying to share that exit. And I do think that that is going to cause problems, and maybe the exit should be moved over or looked at. And thirdly, there must be recreation ground facilities within this site, and maybe some of the 106 money could be used to finance that. There will be an ongoing cost for recreation, and it would be nice to put some money towards that, I would have thought. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe. Joe?
Thank you, Chair. I've not been involved with this application until now, and it's quite a complicated matter. But simplifying it comes down to the extra land along Low Hill Road and entrance into the site. As a site with 400 homes in the traffic in this area, traffic increases at the time had already been accepted by the adoption of the local plan WEF 002 and traffic assessment already accepted. It would be difficult to turn down the entry point of the site. This has been accepted by the highways officer with the provisions to be provided. Members must accept that the increase in traffic in Wen was also accepted when 003 was adopted. If the application goes to appeal, it may well be upheld, and we would have to go on conditions set by the building inspectors. I will vote for this application, and this allows us to set further conditions that reserve matters. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe. Okay, I think we've pretty well discussed this enough. We've got a proposal seconded through a not recorded vote, through a roll call vote. We shall take the vote. Joe, just what you do not please. Mike, thanks.
Thank you, Chair. I'll call your name if you could say for, against or abstention, please, for the recommendation as you've heard with the additional conditions as you've heard outlined. Councillor Barrow.
Against.
Councillor Dakin.
For.
Councillor Elner.
Against.
Councillor Clark.
Against.
Councillor Hunt.
For.
Councillor Jones.
For.
Councillor Vlasma. Councillor Isherwood. And Councillor Wynne.
For.
Chair, I have 5 against and 4 in favour, because obviously Councillor Towers was not participating as the local member.
Thank you. So that's fallen. So we move on to one of the next item on the agenda. Sorry.
Through you, Chair, you now have an undetermined application, so we still need another proposal of some sort.
Sorry.
So it is not an automatic refusal simply because the proposal has fallen.
We have to propose for refusal. David?
Yeah, I'd like to propose that we oppose this application. I think on the basis of certainly CS3, CS5, CS7, I think. There's lots of reasons for opposing the proposal. I think if there's any more, I don't know.
Do I have a second? Thank you, Jeff. Jeff seconds it. You happy with that, Amanda? So it's the thing on.
Through you, Chair, I just think the important thing that we need to understand for members here, because this is now a proposition it isn't supported by the officer recommendation, so it is important that we understand your reasons. So you're saying that what you're not finding acceptable is the fact it goes beyond the development boundary, and presumably you were also saying that you put more weight on that, and therefore that the development should be plan-led in order to be sustainable. You're putting more weight on that than the material considerations that have been advanced before you regarding site layout, less density, the constraints of the site of the gas pipeline, and that you give greater weight to upholding that policy development boundary. The policy manager or the planning officer may wish to add to that, but I think that's what I'm hearing from members.
That's right, David. Check, that's fine. Oh, sorry.
I haven't got anything to
to add to that really is just, I think that's seemingly the issue about development beyond the extent of the development boundary. So there are a particular set of development management policies which we can bring into that. But as Miranda says, it's a case of the plan-led approach as opposed to the material research arguments on that particular parcel of land. So I've got anything to add to that at the moment.
Anybody on there? No.
I have no further comment. I feel like we managed circumstances, so we'll leave the elected instructions.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so we'll go for the votes. Roll call vote.
Thank you, Chair. So we'll do the same again. This time it's a proposition for refusal for the reasons that you've heard outlined. That's been proposed and seconded. Right. Councillor Barrow. Councillor Dakin.
Yes.
Councillor Elmer. Councillor Clark. Councillor Hunt.
Against.
Councillor Jones.
Against.
Councillor Isherwood. Councillor Vasner.
For.
And Councillor Wynne.
Against.
Chair, that is 5 in favour of that proposition and 4 against. It's therefore carried.
Okay. That's carried, so we shall move on to the next item on the agenda, which is item 7, proposed grounding adjacent to 36 Alexander Avenue. Kelvin, you doing that one? Right. Okay.
Thank you, Chair. This is an application for the erection of a dwelling and formation of vehicle access on land adjacent to 36 Alexandra Avenue in the Neil Brace area of Shrewsbury. I just want to draw your attention to the additional letter from a member of the public, which highlights that the council's highways team has advised that deliveries should be made outside peak traffic times and school drop-off and pick-up times, but that this isn't included in the list of proposed conditions. In response, officers advised that the delivery times would form part of the construction traffic management plans, which would need to be as required by the proposed condition 5, again the report. So the site location, site is outlined in red at the corner of Alexandra Avenue and Victoria Road. It forms part of the garden land of number 36, which is to the left of the application site, and includes a garage at the eastern side of the site within the red line shown. Yes. The site lies just outside of the Neil Brace Conservation Area, which is shown edged red on this slide. The site forms a gap between two houses. The existing boundary hedge and garage that you see in the top left photo would be removed. This shows the style of the properties either side of the site. The ones on the right-hand photo are on Victoria Road, which is within the conservation area. And the ones on the left are along from the other side, along Alexandra Avenue. This is the proposed block plan. The proposal is for a detached dwelling. It would respect the building line of the houses on Victoria Road as shown. 2 parking spaces are proposed on the plot for both the new dwelling, and then there will be 2 parking spaces also for the 36 next door. There would also be rear garden space as shown. This is a bit more detailed block plan with the parking spaces shown. There'll be a timber fence erected at the back of the parking with a gate to allow access to the rear. The eaves and ridge height, as shown, would mimic that of the houses along Victoria Road. You see the house is white to the right. And the appearance and the scale being in keeping with the neighbouring property. It would have a single-storey element to the rear, as shown on the bottom. The proposal would have 2 bedrooms and a kitchen, diner and lounge at ground floor. This is the existing property at number 36. It's proposed that some alterations will be made to this property. You can see that the property's got on the top left elevation, it's got a side single-storey element. This will be removed, and on the bottom left plan, you can see it's got a rear element as well, which includes the utility and the WC, and that will be removed as well. And that will provide more space to allow the new dwelling. Next one. This shows what the existing property would look like once those 2 elements have been removed. So this is the applicant's image of the existing site, and you can see the gap in the hedgerow and the garage as well, which will be removed. Next one. And this is the applicant's image of what the property would look like once constructed. So there would still be some gap between the 2 existing properties, and it shows the style of the proposed dwelling, which is intended to that of the existing property to the right. So in terms of the main issues, there are no objections from the highways team or drainage team. The issues are those raised by the town council and local residents and the conservation team in terms of amenity space, the impact on neighbouring property and the effects on the character of the conservation area. The report to committee explains that there was an appeal decision back in 1992 for the erection of dwelling on the site, which dismissed the proposal. That application was not directly comparable, as the appearance and size of the proposed house was slightly different. This is the plans that were put to appeal back in 1992. You can see the proposal had on the right-hand side of the left-hand slide, you can see it's a different shaped property. And also, you can see the elevation on the right-hand slide as well. It's a different type of property, which had its front-facing gable rather than proposal to mimic that of the property to the right. It also didn't involve the removal of the single-storey elements of the existing property as well. The other thing that was different then is that the adjacent area wasn't designated as conservation area. However, the inspector did state in his appeal decision that the design of that property would not be alien to the general character of the area. In terms of the current one, I think greater effort has been made to ensure that the property is more in keeping with existing properties in the area. So the Conservation Area Officer's comments in paragraph 4.5 are acknowledged in terms of their concerns. However, planning officers take a different view and consider that the house is of an acceptable design, which does respect the character of the conservation area adjacent. Also, as the report says in 6.3, officers consider that the impacts on neighbouring amenities are not being unacceptable. This is taken into account the modest size of the house, the rearmost element of it being single-storey, and also the alterations being proposed to the existing house, which would remove those single-storey elements to the side and to the rear. And therefore, it's considered that on balance it would be an acceptable proposal recommended for the planning commission. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Charlie. We don't have any speakers on this item, so I'll go straight to the floor, Joyce.
I have no problems with this application, to be pleased to hear. I think it fits well on the site and it fits in with the street theme, so I will be supporting this application.
Thank you, Joe. Is that a proposal? Okay, second of Joe, thank you. No one's indicating. So we'll go to the votes. Roll call style, of course. Let's go for show of hands. All those in favour? Nearly unanimous. Oh, no, it's against? Two. Okay. That's carried. Okay. All right. Item 8, Everglades. Oh, sorry. All right. Just pop out and see if anybody in the spare spaces. Yeah. Just take a breath, everybody, for a minute. Let me just check. Oh, right, okay. Yeah. Yeah. Okay, thank you, Emily.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Application proposes change of use from existing residential dwelling, which is also used as for bed and breakfast, as a C1, B1 class use, to C2 residential care home with associated works to extend car park provision at the property known as Everglades on Brynhaven Lane, Potter Street. Members' attention is drawn to the update sheet, which includes reference to further letter of objection, and also regards a second letter of objection, which refers to a traffic report submitted on behalf of objectors, members of the public to the application, and which has been commented upon by the Suffolk Council Highways Manager. The slides, please. Application sites coloured red and in mainly a residential area of the town. Note it sits in a large domestic curtilage, post site plan indicating car parking spaces within dwellings existing large curtilage. It proposes 4 more to what is already in place. Next one. This is the existing internal floor layout, the property over 2 floors. And existing, next slide, and that is existing elevations, making use of new space for the second floor. Proposed floor plans, like I said, using existing footprint, proposed elevations, similar to what is there on the site now, and then this photographs of the site. That's the existing dwelling, taken from front, with driveway approaching it. This is Brynhaven Road, which lane, which does access to the site on Brynhaven Road on Brynhaven Lane, from where access into the dwelling is obtained. And that's the lane itself. The application is for 8 dwellings, so for 8 residents with 24-hour carers based on site in a shift pattern with 3 on site during night time. The dwelling sits in a large domestic curtilage and is considered large enough for development as proposed. Concerns about highway transportation matters are noted. However, as set out in paragraph 4.12 of the report, the Suffolk Council Highways Manager raises no objections on this aspect, which is considered in section 6.5 of the officer report. The objections as raised by Oswestry Town Council are noted and have been considered along with the letters of objections and support from members of the public as set out in section 4.2. Obviously, the report indicates a substantial amount of representation from the public, both for and against. In relation to on-site parking provision, this relates to 4 additional vehicle parking spaces from that of the existing situation. Given the nature of the development, on-site management is considered necessary, and this is also in reference to clearly allocated car parking spaces within the dwelling's large curtilage. Issues in relation to on-site vegetation of any significance is considered acceptable, as are drainage issues. In conclusion, it must be noted that this dwelling has been used as a bed and breakfast business, and as such, use of the property in relation to C2 use for up to 8 residents and the chief and the support staff is considered acceptable, with no adverse impacts on surrounding residential amenity and privacy. The scale and layout of the dwelling considered appropriate for the intended use. On-site parking provision and transportation to and from the site have also been taken into consideration, and impacts on these are considered acceptable. The report also touches on concerns about previous not complying with approved plans. This is a separate matter to this application, planning matter. The recommendation for this one is one approval subject to conditions as set out in Appendix 1 attached to the report. Thank you, Mr. Chair. That concludes my presentation of this application.
Thank you, Philip. We do have 3 speakers on this application, and the first is Jonathan Martin. You'd like to come forward, please? Oh, thank you, Jonathan. You have 3 minutes, 30-second warning, okay?
I speak on behalf of neighbouring residents in objection to this application. A number of us are here. The comings and goings of 16 adults will create noise and disturbance beyond that of a large family home. Raised voices and shouting, slamming of car doors as staff arrive and depart, or taking residents out. This out of context use will adversely impact on the quiet enjoyment of our homes. We have circulated our highways report, which advises of a significant impact. The lane is narrow, poorly lit, has solid boundaries, and there are no footways. Visibility is poor. It will be dangerous for pedestrians and those using mobility aids. Average yearly occupancy of a B&B is in the region of 40%, not 100% as suggested in the committee report. This reduces the existing vehicle trips from 18 to 7.2. It is calculated that trips associated with the home would be 31 daily, an increase of 330%. This assessment doesn't consider likely online deliveries, given that residents will be young and shopping habits have changed because of the pandemic. Paragraph 6.4.4 of the committee report acknowledges the width of the road and the need for vehicles to wait based on a slight traffic increase. The reality is the increase will be very significant, as will the disruption. The turning area at the end of the lane is smaller than average. Manual to streets gives road widths to accommodate vehicles in a straight line. 4.8 metres wide allows 2 cars to pass. Anything less means vehicles must reverse. The lane average is 4.35 metres wide for 120 metres. There is a section which is just 3.6 metres wide. The parking layout is inadequate and unworkable. Our swept path analysis shows that even an average sized vehicle can't turn around. This will lead to parking overfill and vehicles reversing out of the site. There are not enough spaces to cope with shift change. The committee report states that staff can use the bus, but the bus will not work. The timetable does not cover shift change. In paragraph 6.3.4, the report states that a well-managed facility won't cause harm to neighbours' amenity. There are lots of negative reviews of the operator online. If this is already in doubt, it is not acceptable to let it fall to the CQC to regulate. The operation of a commercial property in a quiet residential area will have a much greater impact upon our amenities than the existing use. There are more suitable places for a care home.
30 seconds.
This proposal will affect the quiet enjoyment of our properties and will have a detrimental impact upon our lives. Everyone has the right to the quiet enjoyment of their home. We sincerely hope you can take our heartfelt views into account and refuse this application. Thank you.
Thank you, Jonathan. Well timed. Okay, now we have a local member. Duncan, could you like to talk you there, Duncan? So you'd like to 5 minutes, Duncan, for the second warning, okay?
Yep, I'm not sure I'll take all the 5 minutes. Obviously, the application has gathered lots of public interest and comment. Not all the comments are relevant to the planning process, but many of them are. You've heard reference to that in Jonathan's talk earlier. There is a clear need for this type of accommodation in Oswestry. Indeed, the Town Council recently supported an application that was actually turned down by this council. I think the Town Council supported all applications that have come before it until now for residential accommodation. We need to understand that residential homes can be very significant employers. I dare to suggest that sometimes they can employ more people and have more traffic than some of the units that go onto an industrial estate, with commensurate traffic and impact on the locality. This site has a very, very narrow road with no path, surrounded entirely by residential properties. It is hard to think of a less suitable site in Oswestry, and if the term out of character to the locality has any meaning, then I think this site should be rejected on that ground alone. I acknowledge the property operates as a bed and breakfast, but we must guard against incrementalism and judge each application on its own merits. I just also add that C2 is a very wide class. Clearly, the application has in mind a particular client for residential accommodation, but the use class includes boarding schools, nursing homes and training venues. In condition 5, I see it's proposed to limit the numbers, but I would suggest to the panel that if it is to grant permission, then it should also restrict the use to a residential home for people with autism or similar conditions, rather than allow it to become an incremental growth to a different style of accommodation, which could pose even more problems to the locality. Very much.
Thank you, Damien. Okay, we have the agent now, Jennifer Hughes. Would you like to move forward? Thank you. You have 3 minutes, Jennifer, and 30 seconds. Okay.
Good afternoon. My name is Jenny Hughes and I designed the proposals for Everglades on behalf of Achieve Together, who are also represented here today. As mentioned in the submitted planning statement, Achieve Together is one of the leading care providers in the country and offers support for people with learning disabilities, autism and associated complex needs. Great care and time is taken when researching appropriate properties, and 18 homes were viewed in Oswestry itself at the specific request of Shropshire Council Commissioners, as this is where the local need exists. It is the search is a complex process with 3 primary factors that are considered. Firstly, the property has to meet with planning policy in regards to its location to amenities and sustainability, policy that primarily dictates a location within development boundary. Secondly, consideration has to be given to local residents who understandably value their environment and do not wish it to be changed. Thirdly, and of course of equal importance, the property has to fit the needs of the vulnerable people who will be living there, people who are a part of the local community, for whom we all have a duty of care and who have the right to expect appropriate accommodation within it. Residents that will be housed in Everglades will have an autism spectrum disorder and other associated learning difficulties. The severity and impact of these disorders is never consistent, but there are some key personal characteristics that require access to particular environments so they can be managed appropriately and healthily. Just one example is the need for access to sufficient indoor and outdoor space. This enables residents who experience extremely high anxiety and emotional frustrations to have space to learn how to self-regulate. Living in an overcrowded environment, such as a town centre, often produces a constant sensory overload that makes life very difficult. In our professional opinion, Everglades has achieved a balance between resident, neighbour and policy due to its peaceful and calm setting with ample space, its location within the development boundary and close enough to amenities without being in the town centre, its secluded proximity to neighbours as it is detached, and the limited external alterations to the building and surrounds. Achieve Together is working under the Transforming Care programme that was introduced in 2015 following the Winterbourne View inquiry and is still high on the government's agenda today in order to improve care services and free up hospital space for emergencies. It is also high on Shropshire Council's agenda with 180 million currently allocated to adult services. The supported living model from this programme, consisting of self-contained units with 24-hour care, is regulated by the Care Quality Commission and is the model that Everglades will be following. Achieve Together are working with the support and input of Shropshire Council's commissioning and governance team. I hope this statement has provided the committee with some additional insight as to why Everglades has been chosen and the care provision that could be implemented, so that Oswestry continues to be a balanced and caring community that promotes equality.
Thank you, Joanne.
Thank you.
You were 2 seconds over. Well done. Right, Phil, would you like to come back with the other points for the moment?
No, I have to defer to the
Okay, thank you. One name down, Gerald.
Yes. Chairman, if this is a house of multiple occupation, it would, how many rooms do you need before it was 6? 6. So we're talking about 2 extra spaces really along this road here.
But you've got to remember there's living carers there as well.
Yes, but the residents living there won't have cars, will they? So it's still only 8 cars. This is very much needed in Shropshire. This does a great job. It also trains these people living there. I think this is not the ideal place to be because of the road, but it certainly would be difficult to turn down because it could be a house of multiple occupation, and I think this is fine.
Thank you, Joel. Joyce?
Thank you. I want to say I support such accommodation. The community really does need it, but I believe that this is the wrong house in the wrong place. I actually know the site, I actually know the house many, many years ago. I knew the people that lived there. So, wrong place, wrong house.
Thank you, Jeff. Oh, sorry, do you want to come back on that? Thank you.
I find the local members' comments interesting. Could you explain why she liked it?
It's the road work, it's the road, it's where it's situated, it's the surrounding houses. You know, and then we're talking about, I think the lady that spoke, the agent or whoever it was that spoke on it, was saying about that basically it wouldn't be too much distraction for those that have got autism. But actually, I think if you're actually outside that building, there is. And I'd like to see a picture, if it's possible, I don't know if you've got it, of the houses on the other side of the road, or on the other side of that lane, because we don't seem to be seeing them. Sorry? Oh, sorry.
No, yeah. We have applications of this nature for terrace houses, which would have a fraction of that amount of ground to them. So, in opposite opinion, that house is in a large domestic curtilage as far as space is concerned. That's what I'm getting at. And on the highway matters, it's clear our highways officer has looked at it, assessed it, and concluded that the development is acceptable.
If I just may come back, as we've always said, you judge each application on what is before you, and personally, that is only my view, and I understand officers have a different one, and I appreciate that. Thank you.
Your choice, Chair. Thank you, Chair. From the submissions we've had from the various speakers, I fail to understand why residents in a home like this would be noisier than bed and breakfast people. If you've got 8 residents, how many staff have you got? And if you've got 8 bed and breakfast people, how many staff have you got doing the cooking and the breakfast and so on? So to me, it's a fair balance. My only concern is this 120-foot lane. There should be provision for parking, for passing made, I think, as a condition. But apart from that, I don't see any reason why this should not be accepted.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Mike.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I've had a lot of contact over this one because it does border my ward. And, you know, on the face of it, not a lot would change to the property. It's already being used as a B&B, so it's busier than a standard residential property. There'd be no external alterations other than to the parking. However, a couple of things do concern me, and one is the lane being very narrow. Because although highways say that an objection would be difficult to defend, they say that that's because the threshold is so high on safety. So I'm not convinced that that's always good enough, just to say that we couldn't defend an objection on highways grounds if the effect would still be detrimental, just that it doesn't quite meet the threshold needed. I think we should, you know, put the needs of local residents a little bit before that sometimes. A lot of people do walk that lane. It's a very popular walking route because there's a bridle path next to the property. And so a lot of people would be put off, which bothers me because, yeah, I don't think we should be discouraging people from walking. And also the residents themselves who might be walking that lane might themselves be put at extra risk than they would if the access was better. However, you know, we do need this type of accommodation, and it's a brilliant spot, I think, for the intended resident group. But the other concern I have is that once we've given permission for C2, then in the future it could become something other than what this company intends it to be. So on the one hand, I think it's a really good proposal that would accommodate people who need assisted living, who, you know, are part of the community, and we shouldn't be sending them out of borough, as they say. But there are concerns with the suitability of the access in my mind rather than the actual location and type of property.
Thank you. Well,
sorry, hang on, let's come back on.
No, finish council, that's quite a time for you to suggest we ask them at the end how you choose.
Yeah, okay, we'll do Vince first, I'll go to Mark. Okay, do me first, eh? Obviously, I was council for the rest for 12 years, and Everglades was forever popping up, mainly because it gets on growing in size in different directions. And I was extremely sympathetic to the residents over that and their concerns. I'm not quite so sympathetic on this, though, I have to say. As Gerald has said, and my colleague next to me has iterated, it is a much needed facility for these sorts of groups of young people. The lane is not brilliant, but the lane, in the number of years that I was the councillor there, while it was a bed and breakfast, I don't think I ever had a single complaint about the traffic going up and down it. I never had a concern raised about near misses or anything else. I did get some complaints about it being a bit icy and some complaints about the water running down the bridleway and contributing to the iciness, but that wasn't one of them. It is a difficult one. I understand the concerns of the residents, but I don't fundamentally see a huge difference between this and it being a bed and breakfast. If anything, I think you can have a more stable community now, where shifts change and people leave. Night shift has only got 3 people, whereas with bed and breakfast you can have people whizzing in and out all the time between spots, pick up things from their rooms and stuff like that. So I think on balance I will probably be supporting this. I will be interested to hear what Mark has to say, but I can't honestly believe that he's going to say anything particularly different to what he said in the report. Okay, and we go over to Mark now. Any comments, Mark?
Thank you, Chair. The application was originally looked at by our term consultant, WSB, who concluded that they didn't feel that there would be an adverse impact. Obviously, I was aware that there was significant interest locally and concerns raised about the lane. I had a look at the site myself. Indeed, during my site visit, when I was leaving, I actually encountered a vehicle coming the other direction. And we sorted ourselves out because there are some sections along that road which you can pass a vehicle. I recognise, however, it is narrow. Ideally, you would prefer a wider road. It is just under 40 metres between the site access and the main Hampton Drive road. The road itself serves effectively 8 properties, one of which is Everglades. And at the end of the day, it's like a lot of things that the likelihood is there will be some increase in traffic over and above its current use at the moment as a bed and breakfast accommodation. That is set out in the Objectors transport report, which I've read, and acknowledged the deficiencies of that route. But also we have to look at it from the point of view that is the threshold of severe exceeded? And for me, that threshold is not. On that basis, that's why our recommendation is that it is acceptable. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mark. Amanda.
Thank you, Chair. Just briefly, because it was raised by Councillor Isherwood and you've heard reference there by the Highways Manager around this threshold of severe. So just for the avoidance of doubt for members, that comes from the National Planning Policy Framework. And what it actually says is that development should only be prevented or refused on highways grounds if there would be an unacceptable impact on highway safety or the residual cumulative impacts on the road network would be severe. So the advice that you've got before you is that it's not unacceptable and the impacts on the road network are not severe due to the relatively limited increase in traffic. So I think it's just important to understand where that's come from and that is national policy guidance that we are obviously obliged to take into account.
Thank you, Miranda. Edward?
Thank you, Chair. I have to confess, in this case, I don't know the site and don't know the area, so I'm making a fairly objective comment as I see it. This is why site visits are important, as this morning. It seems to me that it's needed. It seems to me that it matches with bed and breakfast to an extent. It's certainly some people who need that sort of accommodation and would make no more noise and not much more staffing, so that's not an issue. It is this highways thing that just stares me in the face looking at it, and as I see that map there with two narrow pinch points, top and bottom, is there nothing that can be done in putting this application forward that allows for that to be widened in those roads in any way? I saw some walls and photographs, but they would have to be rebuilt. It seems the ground belongs to the site, and I just wondered if there's anything that can be done to make that a little better. On balance, I think I can support it.
Thank you. Would you like to come back on that, Mark, about?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Unfortunately, there are no real opportunities between the main road at Hampton Drive right up to the access to the property to put in any passing places.
Thank you. On to Joyce.
Thank you. Just a general comment and a question really. Papers such as these, applications such as this, quote Article 8, human rights acts, peaceful enjoyment of people's homes. Who actually quantifies that? How do you know what impact it's having on these residents? I mean, we keep quoting it, but I've never actually seen it in action. I'm just asking the question, because obviously these residents do have concerns, and it obviously is going to affect them, as stated by one of the residents at the very beginning of the meeting. Thank you.
Thank you,
well, the operation of the site will be subject to licensing and with the use of the building. There's also the council's regulated services that would have investigated if there was unacceptable impact on living conditions of nearby residents.
Any comments from any officers about that? Okay, David.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I can understand why residents are very concerned about the issue of highway safety, but I also understand why the highways manager is making the recommendation years on the basis of the MPPF policy. So I will be abstaining on this, but I do think that the number of there ought to be more parking spaces. I think the assumptions made by the consultants that the number of these parking spaces was silly, really, and I think there will be more than 11 parking spaces needed at different times.
Thank you, David. I'm looking around the room. I haven't got proposed on the table. Anyone would like to propose anything? There's nothing on the table.
I'll propose we accept it.
I'll second it. There you go. Jeff proposed it. Charles seconded it. Okay. No more comments, so we can go for a vote. Miranda, would you like to?
Thank you, Chair. I'll go through as before. Councillor Barrow.
Against.
Councillor Dakin.
For.
Councillor Elner.
For.
Councillor Clark.
For.
Councillor Hunt.
For.
Councillor Jones.
For.
Councillor Isherwood.
Against.
Councillor Towers.
For.
Councillor Vasner.
Abstain.
Councillor Wynne.
For.
Chair, I have 7 for, 2 against and 1 abstention. That is therefore carried.
Thank you, Ms. That's been carried. Thank you. We have one more item on the agenda. I'm just going to be the public would like to move out. Give you a few seconds to move out. Unless you want to stay for the rest of the meeting, you're quite welcome to. Vince, have you got an appointment somewhere?
Sorry?
Have you got an appointment somewhere, or are you all right?
All right.
Thank you. Okay, we'll move to item 9 now. Your side method of practice. Who's presenting this? Kelvin to do? Will it? Okay.
Right, application is made in full and proposes general site clearance, removal of asbestos containing materials and demolition works to slab level at the roadside medical practice Rosal Shootby. The application is brought before committee as it is a Shropshire Council led application, and it's been made in connection with the provision of statutory and which should not be made in line with the provision of statutory service. Therefore, under the terms of the scheme of delegation, the decision needs to be made by the planning committee. There are no updates in this report. It is understood the proposed development comprises the demolition of the building to the slab level, such that the slab level and foundations be left in situ, pending removal at a later date. The site is to be used as the contractor's compound in the short term for the redevelopment of the nearby Riverside Centre. There are no views contrary to the recommendation have been received from either the ward member or the town council. Application site is outlined in red, located on the junction with Smithfield Road. Next. That indicates the demolition phase plan, and which accompanies the application on how the building will be demolished. The current building is of modern construction and of no historic importance, and it is noted that there are no statutory objections to this application. The slide before you indicates it's a building on site. In conclusion, the proposal is considered acceptable, and the recommendation is the planning commission. Planning approval is granted, subject to appropriate conditions to minimise disruption during the demolition process and to ensure that the site is made tidy after this has taken place. The recommendation, therefore, one approval subject to conditions as set out in Appendix 1 attached to your report. Thank you, Mr. Chair. That concludes my presentation.
Thank you, Philip. Straight to the floor, Joyce.
Thank you. It's a no-brainer. I look forward to the redevelopment of the site, and I move the proposal.
Friends, sorry to be here. Thank you very much. All those in favour, please show. Unanimous. Thanks very much. Item 10, appeals. Anybody got any comments on the appeals?
Yeah, this one you'll see has been allowed. Interesting one. Yes, but I needed to defend it now. I take anyhow, on this one, you'll recall that an application of this site came before committee about 12 months ago, or a little longer than that, where you were very much opposed to it. However, in the end, you supported it. It was an heated discussion for a smaller dwelling on site. The applicant subsequently put in for an exit to make it larger. Just to let you know, officers do take note of what you say in committee, and so on balance, we decided to refuse it.
If you take a note,
unfortunately, the inspector didn't agree with us, and he's allowed it. So it's one of those situations. But I thought I'd just make comment with regards to that one.
Thank you, Philip, for that. Right. Item 12, date of the next meeting. To note the next meeting of the North Planning Committee will be held at 2 p.m. on Tuesday, 23rd of November 2020 on the Shrewsbury room, so I'll wait and see on that one. Thank you very much for your attendance, everybody. Safe journey home. And we're still live, so we'll just wait for Emily to give us the nod.
I don't